This is not just food. This is a story that never made it into cookbooks. In African American families, recipes were never written down. They were passed on through taste, through smell, through the hands that kneaded dough at dawn. Many of these dishes were born out of necessity. When the enslaver took the best cuts of meat, enslaved people turned scraps into delicacies. During the Great Depression or the Great Migration, when a large family had to be fed, they found ways to stretch a handful of flour and a piece of fat back across an entire week. These recipes were never published in magazines. They lived in oral tradition and the memory of grandmothers and the smells of Sunday dinners. And today, when we remember them, we are not just cooking. We are paying tribute to the ingenuity, resilience, and creative spirit that shaped American cuisine. Here are 25 forgotten recipes that our grandparents knew. Vinegar pie, the desperation pie. Let's start with a pie that makes people grab their heads when they hear its name. Vinegar pie. In old cookbooks, it was called desperation pie or pantry pie. Imagine the end of winter. No fruit, no lemons to be had, but you need to bake something sweet for your family. What do? Black cooks found the answer as far back as the 19th century. By 1855, recipes for this pie appear in Southern culinary manuscripts. They used whatever was always on hand: sugar, eggs, butter, flour, a pinch of salt, and vinegar. Vinegar in a pie? But it doesn't make it sour. On the contrary, the acid cuts through the sweetness of the sugar, mimicking the brightness of citrus, while the eggs create a delicate, custard-like texture. When you taste this pie for the first time, you can't believe there's no fruit juice in it. In Black families across the South and the Midwest, it was a staple at Sunday dinners and church gatherings. Recently, one woman shared this recipe with her 93-year-old grandmother from Georgia. The grandmother watched and kept nodding. Yes, we made that when there was nothing else. And she smiled. Vinegar pie is proof that even from the humblest ingredients, you can find a path to joy. Peanut butter beans, survival bread. Peanuts became an important cash crop in the South after the Civil War, but their culinary significance traces back to West Africa, where peanuts had been a source of protein for centuries. At the Tuskegee Institute, George Washington Carver helped popularize the peanut as an affordable, soil-restoring crop with hundreds of uses. In Black kitchens across the South, peanuts evolved into breads, cookies, cakes, and candies. During the Great Depression and wartime rationing, when butter, eggs, and milk were scarce, peanut butter stepped in as a substitute for fat and protein. The recipe for peanut butter bread was simple: flour, sugar, an egg, if you had one, a spoonful of peanut butter, baking soda, buttermilk, or sour milk. The bread came out dense, moist, with a distinct nutty flavor. It was eaten warm, often with molasses glaze or simply butter. In the 1930s, this bread became a school lunch staple in Black communities in Chicago and Detroit, where families had brought the recipe from the South during the Great Migration. It was humble but filling, and it served as a reminder: even when there is nothing, you can still create something that feeds a family. Chitterlings, the story of one intestine. No dish sparks as much controversy or carries such a deep history as chitterlings, pork intestines. This is food that white planters threw away, and enslaved people turned into a delicacy. When the enslaver took the best cuts of meat, the enslaved were left with what he didn't want: pig feet, ears, tails, liver, and intestines. From this necessity, an entire culinary tradition grew. Preparing chitterlings is a ritual that took an entire day. The intestines were painstakingly cleaned, soaked in salted water or vinegar, then boiled for hours with onions, peppers, garlic, until they became tender. The smell is distinctive, but for those who grew up in the South, that smell is the smell of Saturday, when the whole family gathered to prepare what would feed them for the week. During the Great Migration, chitterlings became a symbol of cultural identity. They were cooked for holidays, especially New Year's, when the food the survivors turned into tradition served as a reminder of their roots. Today, the dish is often avoided, but it remains an important part of history. From scraps, food. From food, culture. Hoppin' John, luck on a plate. Hoppin' John is not just a dish of rice and cowpeas. It is a New Year's ritual. It is said that each pea eaten brings a coin in the coming year, and the greens, usually collards, bring money. But the roots of this dish go much deeper. Cowpeas originate from West Africa. They were brought across the ocean alongside enslaved people. In some legends, African women hid cowpea seeds in their hair to preserve them during the voyage. When they arrived in America, they planted those seeds, and every January 1st, they made Hoppin' John as a reminder of home, as hope for something better. In South Carolina, where the famous Carolina gold rice was grown, Hoppin' John became a true culinary institution. The classic recipe: rice, cowpeas, smoked pork or pork hock, onions, pepper, bay leaf. Everything simmers slowly until the flavors meld together. When you eat Hoppin' John on January 1st, you are not just having a meal. You are taking part in a tradition that is 300 years old, paying tribute to the people who preserved this taste against all odds. Collard greens, the greens that fed generations. When you think of Southern cuisine, you think of greens. Collards, mustard greens, turnip tops. These leafy vegetables were a staple of enslaved people's diets because they grew everywhere. Could be harvested from the garden plots that planters allowed them to keep, and were extremely nutritious. They are slowly simmered for hours with smoked pork, ham hocks, or smoked turkey until they become tender, buttery, infused with smokiness. The technique is simple. The greens are washed, stems removed, placed in a large cast iron pot with a piece of smoked meat, onions, garlic, vinegar, and water. They simmer on low heat until the greens collapse and turn dark green. And when the greens are eaten, what remains at the bottom is pot liquor, a rich, savory broth. Grandmothers in the South insisted it was the best medicine for everything: colds, fatigue, bad moods. They dipped cornbread into it and drank every last drop. During the Great Migration, families carried not only recipes, but also the habit of never throwing away that green broth. Today, collard greens stand as a symbol of resilience. From what the land provided, they created a dish that fed and healed. Okra, a gift from Africa. Okra is perhaps the most recognizable African gift to American cuisine. In West Africa, it is called gombo, and for centuries, it was a dietary staple. Its sticky texture is perfect for thickening soups and stews. When enslaved Africans arrived in Louisiana, they found French, Spanish, and indigenous cuisines, and they created gumbo, a soup that incorporated everything: okra, tomatoes, shrimp, chicken, and dual sausage. But this simple side dish of okra with tomatoes is a separate dish that was prepared in every kitchen that had a vegetable garden. Fresh okra is sliced into rounds, sautéed with onions, garlic, bacon, then tomatoes, pepper, thyme are added, and it is simmered until the okra is no longer slimy, but becomes tender and rich. This dish was often served with cornbread or rice. Every family had their own version. Some added okra, some added smoked fish. Gumbo and stewed okra are a symbiosis of cultures. They are proof that African traditions were not erased. They became the foundation of what we call American cuisine. Cornbread with cracklings. Cornbread itself was a dietary staple. It was baked from cornmeal, water, salt, and nothing more. But when crispy pork cracklings, left over after rendering fat, were added to the batter, it became celebratory. This was the bread baked in country kitchens, served in roadside taverns, and carried to juke joints for dances. The recipe is extremely simple: cornmeal, an egg, if available, buttermilk or whey, baking soda, salt, and a handful of cracklings. The batter was poured into a sizzling hot cast iron skillet with grease and baked until golden brown. It was crispy on the outside, moist on the inside, and in every crumb was the taste of what the land could provide if you worked it. During the Great Depression, cracklings were a cheap way to add calories and protein. In black farming families, this bread was eaten with molasses for breakfast, with beans for lunch, and with gravy for supper. When cornmeal became more widely available in the 1940s and cracklings became factory-produced, the dish lost some of its authenticity. But in rural Southern homes, it continued to be made from grandmother's recipes, passed down from generation to generation. Candied sweet potatoes. Yams, American style. Many people think sweet potatoes and yams are the same thing, but they are not. True yams are an African root vegetable that fed the peoples of West Africa for centuries. In America, it was replaced by the sweet potato, but the tradition remained. Candied sweet potatoes or sweet potatoes baked with butter, sugar, cinnamon, and nutmeg until they become soft, sweet, almost caramelized. They were prepared like this. The sweet potatoes were peeled, sliced into rounds or left whole, placed in a baking dish with plenty of butter, brown sugar or molasses, spices, and baked in a hearth oven or stove, basting occasionally with the syrup that formed. This dish appeared on holiday tables, at Thanksgiving, Christmas, Sunday dinners. Every bite was a reminder of ancestors who, in Africa, ate true yams. In families that moved north during the Great Migration, candied sweet potatoes became a way to stay connected to home. They were made from the very root vegetables carried north in sacks. Today, when you eat candied sweet potatoes, you are taking part in a tradition that is 400 years old. Fried catfish in cornmeal coating. Catfish, caught in the rivers and ponds of the South, were dredged in cornmeal and fried until golden brown. This dish was always tied to fishing trips, family picnics, Friday evenings when the whole neighborhood gathered for fried fish. But fried catfish carries a deeper meaning. The rivers of the South were abundant with fish, and anyone could catch them, regardless of status. For enslaved people, fishing was not just about food. It was a moment of freedom. A moment when they decided for themselves what they would eat. The recipe? Catfish fillets were patted dry, dipped in buttermilk, coated in cornmeal seasoned with salt, pepper, paprika, and fried in deep fat or a skillet with oil until crisp. Fried catfish became a symbol of that freedom. And to this day in the South, they say, if you don't eat fried catfish, you don't know the South. During the Great Migration, the recipe traveled to Chicago, Detroit, and other cities, where it was served in soul food restaurants, often alongside greens and cornbread. This dish is a reminder that even in the darkest times, joy could be found in a simple catch. Liver with onions and gravy. Liver was an accessible source of protein and iron. It was fried with onions until golden brown, then drenched in a thick gravy. Many people remember this dish from childhood, but rarely cook it today. Perhaps because the taste of liver requires an acquired taste, and that taste is passed down through generations. When you stop cooking liver, you lose more than just a recipe. You lose the connection to those for whom this dish was a lifeline. During the war years and the Depression, liver was one of the few affordable meat products. It was cooked because it was cheap and nourishing. The technique: liver was sliced, dredged in seasoned flour, fried with onions until browned, then broth or water was added to the same skillet, brought to a boil to scrape up the brown bits, and reduced to a rich gravy. Those who grew up on this dish still remember it with warmth. In families from Mississippi and Alabama, liver with gravy was a Sunday supper staple, especially when company came. Today, this recipe is almost forgotten, but in some old culinary manuscripts, it still lives. Pig feet in savory sauce. Another dish that planters considered scraps, but in the hands of black cooks, pig feet were transformed into something extraordinary. They were slowly simmered with onions, garlic, pepper, vinegar, until the meat began to fall off the bone. This dish taught patience. Good things take time, even when you have almost nothing. Pig feet were food for large family gatherings. They were cooked when you needed to feed everyone, and there was no money for expensive cuts. They were eaten with the hands, each bone savored, and in that there was a philosophy: waste nothing, cherish every morsel. The recipe? The feet are thoroughly cleaned, boiled in water with vinegar and salt, then braised with onions, garlic, pepper, bay leaf, sometimes adding cayenne and paprika. In the end, the meat is pulled from the bones and served with rice or cornbread, drizzled with the rich broth. In Louisiana, this dish is called pig's feet and is prepared with cayenne pepper. During the Great Migration, the recipe for pig feet took hold in urban communities as a way to preserve the nose-to-tail tradition. Molasses taffy. Molasses taffy was not just a treat, it was a whole event. Molasses was boiled, poured onto a buttered surface, and when it began to set, it was pulled, twisted, folded, until it turned into shiny golden candies. Children waited for that moment, and the adults remembered. The sweetness you made with your own hands is the sweetest. At Christmas and other holidays, families gathered to make molasses taffy together. It was a ritual that brought them together. The process was physical. Hot molasses was poured onto a baking sheet, Then 2 or 3 people with buttered hands would start pulling it, folding it, pulling again, until the mass lightened in color and became fibrous. Then it was cut into pieces. Even when store-bought candy appeared in homes, taffy continued to be made because it wasn't about the sweetness, but about the time spent together. In families from Georgia and Tennessee, this custom was passed down from generation to generation. Today, molasses taffy has almost disappeared, but in some communities, it is still made at Christmas fairs. Akara, bean fritters from Africa. Akara is black-eyed peas ground into a paste, mixed with onions, peppers, and deep-fried. In West Africa, this dish is still made today. In America, it evolved into what is now called Hoppin' John, or bean fritters. In the 1790s, an enslaved cook named Hercules worked in George Washington's kitchen. He prepared exquisite dishes for the first presidents. But what did he cook for himself and his family? Historians believe he cooked akara, a taste that reminded him of home. The recipe: dried black-eyed peas are soaked overnight, then ground into a paste, mixed with finely chopped onion, hot pepper, salt, and fried in oil until golden. The result is crispy fritters with a spicy, earthy flavor. In Nigeria and Benin, akara is sold on the streets as breakfast. In America, this recipe was almost lost, but thanks to culinary historians like Jessica Harris, it is being revived. When you eat akara, you are not just having a snack. You are eating a story of survival and a taste that crossed the ocean. Red drink, a bridge between continents. Red drink, at weddings, birthdays, celebrations, this vibrant drink always appeared. It was made from hibiscus, berries, or simply from flavored sugar with coloring, but its roots run deep. In West Africa, people drank bissap, tea made from hibiscus flowers. The color red symbolized resilience and joy. Enslaved people preserved this tradition, and in America, red drink became a symbol of celebration. At weddings in Black communities, it was a must. It was believed that without red drink, the wedding was not complete. The recipe was simple. Dried hibiscus flowers, or strawberries, raspberries, cherry juice, were steeped in water. Sugar was added, sometimes cinnamon, ginger, cloves, then chilled and served over ice. In the 1920s and 1930s in Harlem and other urban neighborhoods, this drink became associated with the Jazz Age and the Renaissance of Black culture. Today, this tradition has almost disappeared, but in some families, it is still remembered. Red drink is a bridge between Africa and America, a symbol of joy that refused to be forgotten. Peach cobbler. Before store-bought pie crusts became common, cobbler was made simply. Spoonfuls of batter were dropped onto a skillet of bubbling peaches. It rose, baked, and soaked up the sweet juice. This dessert was a favorite at church suppers, grandmother's Sunday tea parties, on days when something simple and comforting was wanted. Peaches in the South were available to everyone. They grew in every yard. And when the harvest was abundant, peach cobbler became a way to preserve summer on a plate. Recipes varied from family to family. Some made the batter from flour, butter, and sugar. Others simply from flour and water. Peaches, fresh or canned, were placed in a cast iron skillet with butter, sugar, cinnamon, brought to a boil, then spoonfuls of batter were dropped on top and baked until golden brown. Cobbler was eaten warm, often with a spoonful of cream or with ice cream if it was available. In families that moved north, this recipe became a symbol of the southern summer that was so missed in the big cities. Today, peach cobbler is one of the few forgotten recipes that is experiencing a revival thanks to new generations of cooks. Sweet potato biscuits. Fluffy, tender, with a hint of sweetness. These biscuits use the South's main root vegetable. They were eaten with salted butter or a drizzle of cane syrup. Sweet potatoes grew in the soil that generations had worked. Each bite of these biscuits carried the memory of the fields and those who labored in them. During the war years, when wheat flour was scarce, more sweet potato was added to the dough to stretch it, and it turned out they became even more delicious. The recipe? Boiled or baked sweet potatoes are mashed, mixed with flour, butter, baking powder, a pinch of salt, and sugar if desired. Then rolled out, cut into rounds, and baked until golden. The result is soft, moist biscuits that pair perfectly with morning coffee. In families from North Carolina and Virginia, these biscuits were baked for Christmas and Thanksgiving, but also on ordinary Sundays when the whole family gathered. Today, this recipe is nearly forgotten, but in old cookbooks like the Carolina Rice Kitchen, it survives. Braised oxtails. Rich in gelatin, melting in the mouth, oxtails were a Sunday dish. They were slowly braised with onions, peppers, and a thick gravy until the meat began to fall off the bone. This dish is another example of nose-to-tail cooking, using the whole animal, wasting nothing. Every bite of oxtail is a lesson in patience and respect for food. The recipe? Oxtails are seared on all sides, then simmered in broth with onions, carrots, celery, garlic, thyme, bay leaves, sometimes adding tomato paste and red wine. After 3 to 4 hours, the meat becomes tender and the broth transforms into a rich, flavorful sauce. In restaurants today, oxtails are considered a delicacy and are expensive. But once upon a time, this was the food of those who had no choice. And those who knew how to cook them properly understood that slow simmering turns scraps into gold. In families from Louisiana, this dish was often served with rice or polenta, and during the Great Migration, the recipe spread across the country. Macaroni and cheese. How did macaroni and cheese become a black dish? The story is simple. Thomas Jefferson brought the macaroni recipe from France, but who cooked it in his kitchen? Enslaved cooks. They adapted the French recipe, added their own spices, their own techniques. By the 1800s, macaroni and cheese was already a standard on black families' holiday tables. Today, this dish is inseparable from Sunday dinner. It is made for Thanksgiving, for Christmas, for family gatherings. The classic recipe: macaroni is boiled, then mixed with eggs, milk, butter, cheese, cheddar, sometimes other varieties, seasoned with salt, pepper, paprika, and baked until golden brown. In some families, breadcrumbs are sprinkled on top for crunch. Although today, macaroni and cheese can be found in any supermarket, the homemade version, passed down through generations, has a special Sunday taste. This dish is a symbol of generosity and the ability to make a celebration out of the simplest ingredients. Rice pudding. Leftover rice from dinner was never thrown away. It was baked with milk, eggs, sugar, and nutmeg. The result was a dessert, a golden crust on top, a tender, creamy interior. Rice pudding taught that even yesterday's food could become today's pleasure. In African American families, it was often served with raisins or cinnamon. Children loved to skim off the skin that formed on top, and grandmothers would say, "As long as there is rice and milk, we will never go hungry." This was not just a phrase, it was a life philosophy. The recipe: cooked rice is mixed with milk, eggs, sugar, vanilla, nutmeg, poured into a baking dish, and baked slowly until the pudding thickens. Sometimes raisins, candied fruit, or coconut are added. In families from South Carolina, where rice was a staple, rice pudding was made often, especially on Sundays. During the Great Migration, this recipe took hold in the North as a reminder of Southern roots. Today, it is rarely seen on tables, but in some homes, it is still made from grandmother's recipes. Hoe cake. Hoe cakes. The name says it all. Hoe cake, a cake baked on a hoe. Enslaved people baked these cakes directly on the flat blade of a hoe heated over a fire. Later, they were fried in a skillet, but the essence remained, crispy on the edges, soft inside, perfect for sopping up leftover gravy. This was the simplest food: cornmeal, water, salt. Nothing more. Yet it fed generations. The recipe: cornmeal is mixed with boiling water and salt to form a stiff dough, shaped into patties, and fried in oil or on a dry griddle until golden brown. Old sources describe how enslaved cooks used the flat part of a hoe, hence the name. During the Great Depression, hoe cake was a lifeline for many families. From a handful of meal, several people could be fed. When you eat hoe cake today, you are eating the same food that those who built America with their hands ate. This dish is a symbol of ingenuity and the ability to survive under the harshest conditions. Okra with tomatoes. Stewed with onions, garlic, and bacon, okra and tomatoes delivered a taste of summer in a skillet. It was a simple side dish made when the harvest was abundant and everything that grew needed to be used. Okra is a plant that does not like cold. In Africa, it grew in abundance. In America, it began to be cultivated in the South and quickly became part of the local cuisine. This dish is another bridge between continents. In it is the heat of Africa and the humidity of the South, the resilience of plants and the resilience of the people who grew them. The recipe? Fresh okra is sliced, sautéed with bacon, onions, garlic, then chopped tomatoes, hot pepper, thyme, bay leaf are added, and it is simmered until the okra is no longer slimy and the tomatoes release their juice. It is served as a side dish with meat or fish, often with cornbread. In Louisiana, this dish sometimes turns into gumbo with the addition of seafood. In families from Mississippi and Georgia, stewed okra with tomatoes was a summer standard. Today, this recipe is almost forgotten, but on farms in the South, it is still made. A mix of mustard and turnip greens. Mustard greens are sharp, with a characteristic bitterness. Turnip greens are milder, more earthy. They were cooked together, and they balanced each other. In this skill of mixing lies a whole philosophy. Bitterness and gentleness, tartness and sweetness can exist in the same pot. This dish is a metaphor for the lives of those who cooked it. To mix what is available, to find balance, to make the bitter edible, and from the edible, delicious. The recipe? The greens are washed, stems removed, placed in a large pot with smoked pork, onions, garlic, vinegar, pepper, and simmered slowly until tender. Mustard greens add piquancy. Turnip greens add sweetness. In some families, spinach or Swiss chard is also added. They are eaten with cornbread, dipped into the pot liquor. This dish was a staple in the South, especially during the winter months. During the Great Migration, families carried mustard and turnip seeds with them to grow greens up north. Today, this recipe is often replaced by the more familiar collard greens, but in old homes, it is still remembered. Ham with red-eye gravy. Ham was fried in a skillet, then strong black coffee was added to scrape up the brown bits. The result was a gravy with a reddish tint, hence the name red-eye gravy. It was served with cornbread or biscuits. This was a breakfast that provided strength for the whole day. Ham was expensive, but a small piece was enough to season all the gravy, and coffee was always on hand. This recipe is an example of how from almost nothing you can make something that stays with you for a lifetime. The recipe: slices of ham are fried in a skillet, then removed. Black coffee, or strong tea, is poured into the same skillet, and while scraping up the brown bits, the liquid is allowed to reduce slightly until it thickens. The resulting gravy is poured over the ham, cornbread, or biscuits. In families from Tennessee and Kentucky, this breakfast was a Saturday tradition. During the Great Migration, the recipe traveled to Chicago and Detroit, where it was served in soul food restaurants. Today, red-eye gravy is a rarity, but some old-fashioned diners in the South still make it the traditional way. Peanut soup. Peanut soup came from Africa and became popular in Virginia and the Carolinas. Peanuts were ground, added to chicken broth with tomatoes, onions, pepper. The result was a thick, rich soup unlike any other. In West Africa, peanuts were a staple ingredient. Enslaved people preserved this recipe and adapted it to American ingredients. The recipe: onions, celery, carrots are sautéed, in chicken broth, tomato paste, peanut butter, or ground peanuts, spices, thyme, cayenne pepper, are added and simmered until thickened. Sometimes pieces of chicken or smoked meat are added. Peanut soup was often served at plantation owners' dinner parties, but it was cooked by the very same cooks who ate it quite differently in their own homes. During the Great Migration, the recipe spread north, where it was made as a reminder of home. Today, peanut soup is considered a regional delicacy of Virginia, but its African roots are often forgotten. Buttermilk pie. Delicate, silky, with a slight tang. This pie was made from whatever was always in the pantry: flour, sugar, butter, buttermilk. It was a favorite at church suppers, grandmother's Sunday tea parties, on days when something simple and comforting was wanted. Buttermilk, what remained after churning butter. It was often given away or sold cheaply, and from this scrap came one of the most exquisite pies. The recipe: for the crust, flour, butter, sugar, eggs, buttermilk, baking soda. The filling can be simple: sugar, flour, butter, buttermilk, vanilla. It is baked until golden brown. Inside, a moist, creamy texture. Once again, necessity turned into advantage. And again, A recipe that never made it into books was passed from grandmother to granddaughter, staying alive. In families from Texas and Oklahoma, this pie was baked for Thanksgiving and Christmas, and also on Sundays when the whole family gathered. Today, buttermilk pie is almost forgotten, but in some old cookbooks, such as the Virginia Housewife, it survives.